Welcome back to the MVM Show. Today, guys, I'm Titus, your host, and I've got Jim Muller here on the episode again. We've been chomping at the bit to get together again and start recording. It's been a little bit of a while. He's been on the road, then I've been on the road. It's been back and forth, and we're glad to have you on again today, and good to see you.
Thanks, Titus. You too.
So you just recently got back from the Delta Waterfowl Expo in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and man, did I ever want to go to that. I wanted to go so bad. But we're going to just jump into that and how that show went and what you've seen, and then we're going to roll into questions that you had from that. So probably, I'm assuming people that were at the show, some of the questions they ask are listeners to that. So, and I know a lot of them listen to the MVM show, that you were saying quite a few. But before we go any further, I just want to remind you guys, if you want 10% off on Muller choke tubes, we offer a discount through our partnership and friendship with Jim Muller and his awesome crew over there, his wife and Devin and all those, Lauren, all of them over there. I'm sure I'm missing some people, but anyways,
No, you're good,
10%
man.
off. And the code is MVM, all caps, 2024. MVM 2024, all one word, all caps. You put that in and you can get a discount. And I'll put it in the, sorry about that. I'll put it in the, can you hear me okay, Jim?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I had to mute maybe my notifications there, but I'll put it in the description and in the show notes. So whether you're listening on audio through Spotify or anything like that, you can see it down below where you could click it. It'll take you right to the website, and then you put that, if there's anything you're interested in purchasing. And we're going to talk some more about some of those questions you guys had. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, the MVM Show, it's also down in the description for the link to go straight there and you put that code in. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. How did the show go for you? How'd you guys do?
Yeah, the show was really good, Titus. We rolled in on Thursday, got all set up. It was a smooth setup. They actually brought all of our product right to our booth for us, which was so nice. That's never been done before. So they had their things organized. They had a lot of good employees helping, and we got all set up. And then, Friday it opened up at noon. But of course, all the exhibitors and people that know us came by to talk and sold a bunch of chokes before, 11:30, before the show even opened. And once the doors opened, people started coming. And the thing that was nice about it was a lot of duck hunters. Unlike some other shows, some of the shows I've done this past year, I had a lot of people come up to the booth and they're like, "Hey, are these flashlights?" And I'm like, "Man, I'm in trouble."
Man.
And I'm not saying a few people, I'm saying a lot of people. And I'm like,
Wow.
Man, this isn't a show. This is not going to be a good show for us. But this show was the total opposite. It was all duck hunters. Everybody was knowledgeable. For the most part, educated about things, and they knew what they wanted. They came over. A lot of them, a high percentage of them said, "Hey, man, we saw your podcast with MVM. They're awesome." I was like, "Sweet," So hat off to you on that. And so a lot of people came over. They weren't tire kicking. They were buying. They had heard a lot about Muller chokes thanks to MVM and some other, things like, things that I do with shot cam videos, which was another, high feedback thing. So it was really good.
Yeah. Did you get to look around at all, or you're too busy? It's not like I was talking to you yesterday, I think it was, and said you might need to take a mic and a big 2 speakers to compete against all the duck calls.
Yeah,
and the
man.
large crowd.
Like we were saying, I love duck calling, I love speck calling, I love goose calling, but it's hard because they're wailing away, and you got the guys that are trying to break the thing, like see where it's going to break and screech and stick, and you got guys just screaming on it, not calling. And like I've got 10 customers in front of the booth asking me questions, and I can't hear them. I can't hear anyways, and they're yelling at me, trying to ask me questions. They're leaning into me, yelling. I'm yelling back, and I'm like, my Lord.
Yeah.
But it's
you
awesome,
had a great idea though. Like you said, we're everybody there is duck hunters. I mean, there's probably very few that would go to that show that is not a waterfowl hunter. So, but you had a great idea. I mean, the reason I was saying that is we don't not like calling, but
Exactly.
if you had a great idea of putting in a whole separate room where all the call makers, it would help their business, and it would be able to allow people outside of that to hold on conversations.
Yeah, so I know that they're going to have the show in Oklahoma next year, so it will be a different setup, right, as far as maybe rooms or auditoriums. But like this show, that would have been such a unique and special experience because the hall that we were in seemed like extremely busy from what I heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other hall, the other arena, was just as big, if not bigger, but apparently a lot of people didn't know it existed. So a lot of vendors over there didn't do very well with traffic. And imagine if all the call people were in that room, everybody would have known it was there because they would have
Right.
heard it.
Yeah.
So everybody would have been busier because the people that didn't have calls would have been in the other room. Everybody would have seen them. And then the other exhibit area, they would have heard all the calls over there and everybody would have went there.
Mm.
And, you know, I think that it would be a tremendous thing for the call manufacturers because the ones that are unique or the ones that stand out, people are going to experience that.
Yep.
Right. So, like, if I was one of the top call manufacturers and I had a good crew blowing calls, I would want that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because I know I'm going to stand out and pull people.
Yep.
So, if I was a call company, I would want all the call companies to be in one area.
Right.
And I think it would be beneficial for everybody personally.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that was a great idea. Hopefully that can get around to somebody that's in charge of that because I just think it's a good idea all the way around. So,
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I wasn't the only one that came up with that idea. There were some top call guys that were talking to me about that, as well as some top vendors and some top guides and outfitters, top YouTubers. I mean, they
mm,
were all saying this, people that film, you know, in the hunting industry, they were all saying the same thing to me. They're like, "Man,
mm,
that would be a great idea," you
mm,
know. So
yeah.
it's not just my thought; it's a lot of people that feel the same way.
Yeah, and here's another thing. This show is new. Was this the second year or was this the third year?
I'm not sure. I know it's at least 2 years. It could
Yeah.
be more,
I
but
know I don't want to lie because I know it ain't no more than three because I thought I went to last year was the first one, but maybe that was the second one. So I'm
yeah,
not sure, but
I,
it's
I
new.
believe you're right.
So I'm
Yep.
sure they're going to get stuff dialed in and because I don't know if there's nothing that beats it when it comes to waterfowl. I think it's the biggest one. I don't know. Do you
Yeah,
know that?
Ducks Unlimited, the big national
Mm-hmm.
one that they have is supposedly really big. Most of it's outdoors and stuff. I've never participated, but the nice thing about Delta is, you know, DU is great, right, for what they do.
Right.
But DU is like NRA; they're huge and they take care of so many different things. Delta is really dedicated to the ducks
Mm-hmm.
locally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like DU does a lot of good things for ducks, but their money goes in Canada and other countries and other places. Maybe I shouldn't say other countries, but their money goes in a lot of different areas from insects, to birds, to ducks, to geese, to just, nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just habitat and everything, not just ducks.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a lot bigger than a lot of people realize. And I think that what Delta does, it really brings it home to us. So
Yeah.
I like to support them.
Yeah. Same here. So
So
let's go ahead. You got asked so many questions at this show. Like you said, you basically lost your voice because you just talked and explained to people and opened, I'm sure, a lot of people's eyes. So this first episode, everybody listening, we're going to do this one, and then we're going to do another one that will be coming out shortly after this one. That's going to go into some of your questions on YouTube or emails, and some I had myself. But this one's going to be questions from what you were hearing at the show this trip that you would like to address.
yeah, so one of the biggest things that stood out that is still standing out, and I say still because obviously I'm just one person, right, Titus? So,
Hmm.
so we do the podcast, which is really big and helpful, but we're still just, a couple people trying to teach, right?
Hmm.
So I shot a video like a few months ago about my UFO choke because so many people call the office. Like we get calls multiple times a day. We even get people exchanging the chokes to UFO a lot because they buy it thinking they want the tightest choke, the tightest pattern. But what's happened is that is still the routine thought process for so many people when it comes to steel shot, right?
Hmm.
And so I had so many people come up to me at this show and say, "What's your tightest choke?" And I'm like, "My UFO, which doubles as my strut turkey choke also." And they're like, "Well, that's what I want." And I said, "Okay, are you hunting turkey or are you shooting TSS at ducks or geese?" And they said, "Oh, no, I'm shooting steel." And I said, "Well, you definitely don't want my UFO." And they take a step back and they're like, "Well, yeah, I do." And I said, "Well, no, you don't." So, and I don't want to upset people, but I want to educate them, right? I want to help them because I don't want people to buy the wrong thing, have a bad experience, and
Hmm.
then wonder why, right? So if I'm able to talk to them face to face, I want to be able to help them and teach them, right? So one gentleman, for example, and there were quite a few like this. One gentleman came up to me and said, "I want your tightest choke," and went through that whole thing. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Listen," I said, "so you're shooting steel shot." I said, "You don't need to tell me what brand or any of that. I don't care. It doesn't matter right now." I said, "But what kind of ducks are you shooting and what distance do you want this tight choke for?" And he said, "Oh, I'm shooting anything from teal to mallards, and I want to be able to fold them at 70 yards." And like Joel Strickland was standing next to me at the booth, and I looked at Joel, and Joel's jaw just like was open, you know. And and so I said to him, I said, "So listen," I said, "I'm not downing you in any way. I said, I'm not, saying anything negative here to you. I said, I just want to help you." I said, "But to be honest with you," I said, "to think that you could kill a duck with steel shot at 70 yards is not ethical and it's not real." I said, "Because really you can't do it." I said, "I'm not saying it's totally impossible, but the odds of it is really slim to none." And I'm like, so without like being defensive, I said, "Tell me what ammo you're shooting, what shot size, what types of ducks are you shooting, and how often are you shooting at 70 yards?" So we went through this whole thing. I tried to like sort of talk him off the shelf or off the cliff without insulting his intelligence, right? Or upsetting him. And he basically, said that he shoots steel twos or BBs, and he shoots an extra tight choke, and he feels like he can kill ducks consistently at 70 yards with his combination. So I said, "Okay," I said, "let me ask you something." Down the aisle that we were on, there was a black banner, a black feather banner flag. And I asked him, I said, "Do you see that flag?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How far do you think that is?" He said, "Oh," he said, "that's probably 50, 55 yards." He said, "I'm shooting birds right on the other side of that." So I said, "Okay." And I reached down and I pulled out my Vortex rangefinder and I shot the flag and I looked at it. I already knew what it was because I had done multiple, marks before anybody had come. So I knew what everything was already. And I handed it to him and I said, "Here, do me a favor." And I said, "Shoot the distance on that flag." Well, he didn't know how to use the rangefinder, number one, which told me he never used one, right? Which
Hmm.
so many people don't, which I'd like to also get into. I taught him how to use it, and he shot the flag, and it was 38 yards. And he was like, I don't think I'm doing it right. It says 38 yards. I said, "That's exactly how far it is."
Yeah.
And like he just he just got like really quiet. So I started shooting different things in the room and like the back wall even, and the ducks spinning around and all these different boots, and started talking about it. and he was just blown away. So I'm like, listen, number one, get yourself a rangefinder because you can learn a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the things you learn with the rangefinder is not just like distance. It teaches you a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that we need to know as wing shooters or clay target shooters or anybody that's shooting a moving target, whether it be with a shotgun, a rifle, a bow, a slingshot, whatever. If you're throwing a rock at something, it's like throwing a football to somebody doing a down and out and running across the football field, right? You need to know the things that create lead are speed of projectile, which we don't care much about in the shotgunning world because we're pretty much about the same. We could talk about that for days also. Um, so that's sort of a constant. Then you've got distance and speed and angle of the target, right? So those things are what create forward allowance or lead. So if you learn what actual distances are and you know what speed the target is going approximately based on standard duck speeds, you can really start to learn what type of forward allowance targets need at a certain distance. So if you could learn what distance is, then you could learn what speed is. And then on the internet, it will literally tell you how much forward allowance you need based on the velocity of ammo. Okay. And yes, there's a lot of little details that go into that, which we could talk about, but doing a rangefinder is critically important for lots of knowledge for yourself. Okay. And getting back to the point, this gentleman really thought, along with so many other people I talked to that are very knowledgeable and educated as hunters, reading the distance is way wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we read the distance way wrong, we tend to use the wrong choke, the wrong ammo, maybe even the wrong gun. So that's why it's so important. So once I explained to this gentleman what the true distance was, then explained to him what pattern effectiveness and what size pattern he could expect out of a steel shot load that he was talking about through my 3 different constrictions, then I started to teach him about foot-pounds of energy, penetration, 100 pellets inside a 30-inch circle, the distance between those pellets and what's effective on a bird for an ethical kill. It really taught him a lot in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to try to teach people. What comes out of this, and I know I'm talking about a lot, but what comes out of this is the last thing you want with steel shot and even bismuth is a very tight choke. And here's the reason why. Number one, if the choke is shooting a truly tight pattern and a nice, efficient tight pattern, like my UFO does, or even my passing, but we'll say the UFO, that pattern is going to supersede or extend way farther out than the foot-pounds of energy of the material of the pellet.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is everything, let's say that the pattern efficiency of that really tight choke does not fully develop until 60 yards. We'll just use that as a round number. Well, what that means is at probably 50 to 75 yards, that choke pattern is optimal. Okay. The last thing you want to do is be shooting a lighter pellet through that cannot retain enough foot-pounds of energy out at that distance, because everything inside that distance, number one, the pattern has not fully developed, which means it's going to be inconsistent and inferior to what it would be with a more open choke that's meant for that yardage. But more so, and way more important than that, your pattern is going to be way smaller than it needs to be. Therefore, it's way smaller than it should be for your margin of error, which means you're going to miss birds for no reason because you have no margin of error. And also, if you do connect with a bird that's close, you're going to blow them apart. Blowing apart means if you were to hit the bird solid and you bring it because it's a duck you want to mount, if you bring that to a taxidermist, the feathers are going to be all broken, beat up. The bird's going to be beat up. The beak's going to be beat up. The feet are going to be broken. All the feathers are going to be twisted and broken. You don't want to mount that bird anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
never mind eat it, right? So like there's nothing good about shooting a really small pattern at a close bird. And if you're using something like steel shot, especially, that loses foot-pounds of energy, let's say at 40 or 45 yards, then why are we shooting a choke that's providing a pattern that is not efficient until 50 or 60? You know? So these are the things that people really need to think about. If you're shooting the right steel load or the right bismuth load, and I'm using those two pellet materials because they're lighter than lead. I know we can't use lead in this country for waterfowl, but we can use lead for other things, right? So it's lighter. They're both lighter than lead. They're both lighter than heavy shot. They're both lighter than heavy 13 or heavy 15, or obviously way lighter than TSS 18. So if we're using steel shot and bismuth, which are the two top selling shot shell components in the entire world right now, then why are we still thinking about tight choke? It doesn't make sense. They don't go together. You would be much better at, from in your face out to 40 yards using my decoy choke, because that is going to give you the correct pellet spread and density that you would want in that 100 pellet 30-inch circle thing we talk about. It's going to give you more than 30 inches if you have enough pellets. And that more than 30 inches is going to give you that much more effective margin of error. So your hit to miss ratio goes through the roof. That's really important to hear, right? Your hit to miss ratio goes through the roof. You stop missing as much. You start connecting a lot more. Your cripple ratio goes way down because your pellet spread throughout the entire pattern from inside core to outer fringe is very consistent and even. So you're hitting the bird with a lot more pellets. It's like covering them with a blanket, and you're hitting the vitals a lot more often. So we're getting more distance out of a more open choke with these materials. We're getting a bigger pattern, which gives us a bigger hit to miss ratio. We're getting fewer cripples. I mean, all better things with a more open choke. And this is so important to try to realize and learn and be open to. This is the reason that I give 60-day money back guarantee from when you start to actually pull a trigger on my chokes. You buy it now and you don't use it till January, your 60 days starts in January, right? The reason I do that is I trust people, right? We're going to all do the right thing, but I want you to experience the benefits, and I want you to try to take my word of advice, even though you may not agree with it and it may not make sense to you and you may not believe it. I want you to take what I'm saying and just go try it, risk-free. And if it doesn't work for you, then, hey, guess what? I also have a free constriction exchange program where I'll swap them for free until you get exactly what you want, right? Everybody wants something different. So even though I recommend the decoy, knowing that it's the best for those ammos out to that certain distance, maybe the people want a tight pattern because it's what they like. Well, then I'll swap it for a passing. If you want a UFO, I'll swap it for that. Whatever you want after you get to experience what should be the best. And that's why I do what I do, Titus.
A guy asked me a question, and I had to think about it for a second. I was like, but I'd like to hear your answer on it. And I think it was on a video I did of the patterning with my 20 gauge.
Yep.
Okay, so you got the passing choke, you got the decoy choke, and there's not a huge difference, right, until about after 40 to 45 yards where you're going to see the difference, right?
So
his point.
Go ahead.
Well, I know that's going to be a loaded. You're probably going to have a lot more to say about that, and that's what I want. But
yep.
What he was asking me is, why not shoot the passing choke then? Because if they're the same from 15 yards to 40, and then after that, it's going to be good for past that, then why even shoot the decoy?
So theoretically, and I mean, not just theory, but this goes back to the whole shooting paper thing, right, Titus? So if you shoot paper, it's only one dimensional. The only time we can look at it as two dimensional is if we stand on the side of the paper, on the thin side of it, and see where the pellets came through the back side.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes two dimensional, the little, funnels that stick out the back of the paper. So paper is one dimensional theoretically, okay, for argument's sake. The problem when you shoot paper is you don't see. So if you have a shot shell, whether it is 50 pellets in a shot shell or 500 pellets in a shot shell, every single one of those pellets in that shot shell is going to go through that paper, okay? But what we don't see is how or when it got there, okay? And this is a tremendous thing. This is like what Joel Strickland did with his high-speed photography, slowing things down and being able to observe things in midair and look at them. And, there's some other things that we're going to hopefully be doing with that to broaden what he did, right? There's some other things that I want to do with that. And we've talked about that, and it really makes sense. So I don't want to talk about that now because I'm not the one doing that test. And we'll talk about that when it happens. But you don't see what's really happening in the air, right? So a lot of people talk about shot string. They talk about pattern efficiency, even though they don't really know what either one does or means. They talk about shot-to-shot deviation, pellet spread, the bell curve, the Gaussian bell curve, all these different things, hot core, outer fringe, right? So there's a lot of things to take in consideration when you're shooting multiple projectiles, not a rifled slug, okay? And what we don't see a lot of times when we're patterning on paper is all of these other things that are in play, all right? All we see is a bunch of holes in paper. So let me explain what I mean by that. And I'll give you some true facts of what's happened to me in the past. So many years ago when I started developing my chokes for an advantage for myself, I had to buy all the different chokes on the market, all the different constrictions. I shot them through several different guns. Then that expanded into 22 different guns with 13 bore diameters, with every choke on the market, every ammo on the market. Some of those ammos don't even exist anymore, with guns that people don't even use anymore. Some of those companies actually even went out of business, okay? So I did huge amounts of testing. It was insane. But I shot basically 12,000 rounds on paper, mud, water, live birds, clay targets, bobbers floating in the water, lobster pop buoys in the water, you name it, I did it, right? And what I learned, let me get back to the reason why I did all of that and not just paper. I was shooting paper and paper and paper, tar paper, rosin paper, cardboard. I was shooting everything. And I would have patterns that looked picture perfect. If you looked at them and you took a picture, you would be like, oh my Lord, it looks like you hand drew it. It's incredible, right? Then I had patterns that had holes in it, splotchy, maybe a hot core, maybe the outer fringe had a lot more pellets in one area than the other. I took those same exact combinations out into the boat and I set up a decoy at 35 yards. Well, I did all distances from 25 out to 65 on the water. And I shot these same combos at that decoy on the water on a horizontal surface where I could see the effects of shot string, effects of everything, right? A lot of times, and not every time, which makes it even more difficult, but a lot of times I would take the patterns that look picture perfect, expecting it to be absolutely explosive on that duck decoy in the water. And a lot of times the one that was picture perfect, there were pellets all around that decoy that I could see hitting water with a very long torpedo shot string. And I'd be like, what the heck? That didn't seem to coincide with what I saw on paper. That should have been like incredible. And then guess what? I go to the patterns that didn't look nearly as good on paper. Boom, explosion. The duck decoys got pellets all over it. And there was like you threw an M80 in the water. And I'm like, oh my gosh, short shot string on the horizontal surface, explosive pattern, would have been a dead duck, whereas the other one would not have been a dead duck. And I'm like, now what do? I was like, man, I thought that I had this all figured out. I didn't. So that's what you get when you shoot paper. And this is something people don't know. They don't understand because they've never done all these different things of testing, right? Many thousands of times. Anybody could shoot a shot on paper and say, okay, this looks amazing. This is what I'm using on ducks. The problem is, if you repeat that 25 times on 25 sheets of paper with the same ammo and the same choke and the same gun, I assure you, you will get patterns that look nothing like that one. So this is why choke is so important. Geometries in the choke are so critically important. Material of the choke, exit diameter based on the geometry in the choke and the barrel bore diameter it's in. And not only the barrel bore diameter, but the metallurgy in the barrel, the heat treatment, the machining, the fitment. I mean, let's look at this, right? Rifles. If anybody knows about long distance rifle shooting, right? Snipers, long distance big game shooters. What do? They use floating barrels that are bedded on stocks that are created that way. Why? Because that creates the proper harmonics for the proper bullet placement at those long distances that a normal stocked barrel could not achieve. Why? Because of harmonics, because the barrel moves when you shoot through it, right? Same thing happens with a shotgun barrel. They move, right? Just like when you let go an arrow out of a bow, it bends, right? So all the different wall thicknesses, arrow diameters, materials, carbon fiber, aluminum, this all matters. Length, right? It all matters. Every time you change something, physics change that product or the way it works or responds, or at least it changes the end result is what I'm trying to say. So people really, when they say, hey, that doesn't pattern good on paper at 25 or 30 yards, or, hey, why does that look the same as that at 20 yards? Why would I bother using that one? Why don't I just use that one? Well, the fact is they're not the same. You just think they are based on what you're seeing on a one-dimensional thing from firing a shot. You don't know what it's really doing. I know what it's doing because of all the testing I've done, which is why I do the warranty I do, because I want to teach people and try to educate them into trying these different thought processes, if I could, say it the right way.
Yeah.
So getting back to your question, if that didn't really answer it in a roundabout way, a decoy choke or a skeet choke or an improved cylinder choke will not and should not pattern the same as a full choke at a certain distance, or should I say at the distance they're intended to be used at. And what I mean by that, Titus, is I don't plan on shooting a clay target at 60 yards with a cylinder choke, nor do I plan on shooting a 10-yard target with a full choke. So you should be testing the choke based on the distance it's intended to be used at, and of course the ammo, right? I'm not going to shoot double up buck at a duck. I'm going to shoot at a deer or a hog. So I'm not going to pattern it at duck distances. I'm going to pattern it at distances I intend to shoot a coyote or a deer or a hog at. So this is all relative because it's physics. It's not a single projectile. It's many, many BBs hitting the air in all different ways every time because every BB is different slightly, right? There may be little flats on some. There may be different size or mass on some. They're going to all be affected upon differently upon ignition in the bottom of the shock column. You've got drafting like NASCAR race cars. You've got velocities in play, wad hardnesses, durometers, spacers, crimps. I mean, primer pressures, powder burn. I mean, dude, we could get dizzy talking about this. But the fact is, most of us don't need to know any of that because people like myself and others have done this for you. So stop trying to reinvent the wheel. Try to listen to the people that have done it all and try to go off of what the knowledgeable, educated, modern people of shotgunning ballistics are teaching you now these days. Not the people that are spewing stuff forward from the 40s and 50s that has been spewed forward through mentors, coaches, best friends, hunting buddies, even parents and grandparents. That information that was back then may have been good and accurate back then. It no longer prevails or is true today with the components of today. Modern ammo, modern shotgun barrels, modern choke tubes. Physics never change, but that stuff has all changed. So that's why it's important to listen to the people of today's ballistics experts, not of back then. So one other thing that I forgot to say. So people ask, okay, why did the decoy pattern similar to the passing at 20 yards or 15 yards? Why did my IC choke pattern similar to my full choke at 15 or 22 yards? And there's a reason why I just said 22, and I'll explain that. The reason is because your pattern has not fully developed with the tighter choke yet, because it's not intended to be used at that distance. So what happens is when you extend the distances out, the open choke is going to start to open up. It's going to get to a point where it is no longer efficient or ethical for what you're using it for, but the tight choke now is going to start to really shine. It's going to start to develop and come into its own, and it's going to maintain much further. Okay? So they all start out as a small cone, but the tighter it is, or shall I say, the more, the tighter it's meant to be, the longer that is going to start to transition into what you're looking for. The reason that I bring this up, I had many years ago, this was exactly 2010. I know that for a fact based on my patent on my Featherlight chokes. I went to a big German shotgun company that is one of the best in the world. They know what they're doing, obviously. They do amazing things. Their guns are incredible. They took my chokes and their chokes, and they patterned them. They came back to me and they said, hey, we didn't see much difference in your constrictions versus our constrictions. And I said, really? I said, because I've patterned thousands of rounds through your chokes and your guns and my chokes and your guns with every ammo on the market, and I've seen tremendous distances. And here are the pictures and videos of what I've had. I spent hours with these people, and they all looked at me and scratched their heads and said, well, we don't see those differences. And I said, well, what distance are you patterning all the different constrictions? I figured this was going to get into a really big conversation. Oh, we pattern them in our indoor range at 22 yards. I said, wait a minute. What constrictions are you patterning at 22 yards? Every constriction. I'm like, okay, stop. So this company that is tremendous and extremely well known was patterning every choke in the industry against their chokes out of 12 gauge guns at 22 yards with the same ammo and expecting the differences to be noticeable. And that's when the light bulb went on. And I'm like, my gosh, I'll bet a lot of people are doing this. Well, guess what? A lot of people were doing that because they've heard that that's the way to pattern. This is not a rifle trying to set trajectory for 100, 250, 300, 600 yards. this is shotgunning ballistics, okay? We don't shoot at 100 yards. We are shooting mostly inside 40. So we really need to think about what we're doing here. Chokes, conventional choke constrictions are in 5/1000ths of an inch constriction variations or steps from your bore diameter. Now, like I've taught many times, thousandths of an inch constriction in a choke tube is grossly secondary to the geometry in the choke for the gun it is in. So people say, oh, not every choke pattern's the same with every ammo. You're absolutely right. But that's why I've done so much research, patterning, testing on all these different formats, high-speed photography, mud, water, live birds, clay targets, paper, you name it, I've done it, right? The reason that I've done these things is not because I wanted to, believe me, but because I felt that I had to. And the more I did it, the more I realized I had to if I wanted to learn what the truth was. And I don't expect anybody to do anything near what I did. But what I'm telling you is rather than trying to do all of that, save your time, save your money, save your energy. Your time is the most valuable thing you could ever do. Money doesn't matter. None of it matters. Time matters. So save your time. Stop going to the patterning board, blowing time, blowing ammo, blowing money, and doing things that you don't have to do when it comes to Muller chokes anyway, because I have the warranty that I give you. So
right.
So
well,
that's what I'd like to say about that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that. We're already hitting close to 40 minutes or right at it. There was another one that another question you had a lot that you're wanting to bring up. And I feel like, and this is good. This is a good thing because I don't want to rush any question. If you don't feel like you're done with the rangefinder and all that, I say we continue on that. So if you have more to add to that, we'll do 100 other episodes. You know what I mean? I don't want to shortchange these topics.
No, that's good. So with the rangefinder, without getting into huge detail, a good rangefinder is irreplaceable for knowledge. Okay. So many, many years ago, when I started getting into all this testing, this all started on a sporting clay course, right? And somebody that was very knowledgeable brought the rangefinder to my awareness, right? And started range finding the trap, range finding where the target was hitting the ground, and explaining things to me in relation to target distance and speed, and then, of course, angle, right? But it was so eye-opening when I had a true crossing target that came from the trap that was 42 yards, and it crossed directly in front of me on a 90-degree angle at 35 miles an hour. That was tested with a gun, okay, and landed, off to the side. And we literally did the math and figured out what the lead was, a forward allowance on that target using a sustained lead, like I always talk about, pulled along on a string. That's the only way that this distance could work, right? Because if you're moving the gun faster than target, that forward allowance is not the same, right? Or if you're pulling away at a faster speed, that forward allowance is slightly different. So we used a sustained lead because we could. We used the formulas based on physics and speed and distance and angle. And when we got the distance figured out with the rangefinder, we knew the speed of the target and we gave it the right lead. The target broke every time. And it was mind-blowing to me back then because there were targets that I could not hit. The reason I wasn't hitting them for me because I was over-leading them. I was shooting way in front of them, but I felt like I needed more. So I would go more and I would go more. And I'm like, my God, where is this thing? Well, I was over-leading at the first shot. Okay. Wow. But for my eyes, I thought it was farther and it looked faster than what I thought it was. And therefore I was leading it too much. But my brain, the computer between the 6 inches of my ears, felt like based on experience and based on everything, I needed more. So the first lead I gave it, when I missed, I immediately doubled it. I missed. I had doubled it again. I missed. I'm like, what is going on? Well, I found out my first lead was double what I really needed.
Wow.
And
Wow.
there's other ways to do that now, I've learned, of course. But with the rangefinder, it literally totally turned the light on and blew up my world. It just made things so much easier for me and made so much sense. And then, I did it in my archery hunting and everything, and it was just amazing. So that's why I want to bring the whole range finding thing up.
Yeah.
Because I know that a lot of people probably hear about it. A lot of people probably just, whatever. But I'm telling you, for a couple $100, you can really change your life when it comes to shooting if you learn distances.
I 100% agree with that.
Yep.
I think we'll wrap this one up here, and it's okay that we're not touching on everything because that means we're digging in good and we're learning. So I just think I started using a rangefinder a couple of years ago for other purposes too, like setting decoys and knowing, okay, that farthest decoy is 40 yards.
Yep.
Just knowing distances, but doing it how you're saying is even such a better way that I started doing in the season last year because we had done podcasts before the season started. So anyways, I think it's great, and I appreciate the knowledge you're sharing with us. And for this episode, guys, stay tuned, and we're gonna keep rolling. There'll be a bunch of episodes coming out. Hopefully, we can keep the ball rolling on this. Now it's getting closer to season. That's kind of what our brains are always. I guess your brain's always thinking shooting and everything. So
yeah, it's always there, man. Like I always said, when I'm not hunting, I'm not shooting sporting clays. Let's say I'm just fishing or scuba diving or whatever I'm doing. I'm still going down and handling my guns, mounting them, and following the lines where the ceiling meets the wall, and mounting to the corner and making sure that my mount is good, my movement's good, the way I'm holding the gun is good, making sure that if I gained a little weight or lost a little weight, the gun still fits me. Because when we lose weight, gain weight, grow a beard, put a face net on, man, things change big time. So you got to be really careful with all that stuff. And that's a whole nother video.
Yep, I know. That's okay. More content is great. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for listening on this episode, and we'll see you guys on the next one.